Is the Raleigh, North Carolina luxury housing market slowing down? Well, that's a question many buyers and sellers are asking right now. But after reviewing the latest numbers from Apex, Cary, Holly Springs, and Raleigh, the answer isn't nearly as straightforward as you may think. In fact, in some communities, home prices are climbing and homes are selling faster than they were even a year ago. But then in others, inventory is rising and buyers are gaining more options. So what does it mean for you if you're planning to buy or sell or relocate to Raleigh, North Carolina in 2026? So today I'm going to break down exactly what's happening in the luxury market across Raleigh, including some of the surrounding towns that I go over every month. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Trish with Dare Realty Group, and my husband Steve and I help luxury buyers and sellers throughout Raleigh, North Carolina and the surrounding towns. Every month, I break down what the numbers look like so that you can make an informed real estate decision. And as always, I focus this report on luxury homes, looking at the market segment from $750,000 and above. And the reason I do that is because that market looks a lot different from some of the lower price market. So I really want to segment that market out. And the reason I break out that segment when I'm doing my numbers is because that includes many of the relocation and move up buyers that are entering into Raleigh. And those are the folks that we've been helping. So I really want to make sure that we're hyper focused on those numbers. So as I started to look through the data, one of the things that stood out most to me this month is that we're not seeing one housing market. In fact, we're seeing several different markets moving in several different directions. So today I'm going to start with Apex because that market is making a pretty strong statement right now. So if you're looking for signs that the housing market in Apex is starting to slow down, well, the Apex numbers don't help that argument at all because the median home price climbed from $858,000 last May to $945,000 this year. And so that's a 10% growth. At the same time, homes are actually selling a lot faster. Last year, it took 12 days for a home to go under contract in this market segment. Today, it's taking about 6. So let's think about that for a moment. Prices are going up, yet buyers are making decisions twice as fast. And what's even more interesting is when we look at inventory. Active inventory increased from 82 homes on the market to 106. So inventory actually rose about 29%. So normally when we see inventory rising, we would expect homes to sit longer. But instead, buyers are continuing to absorb those listings immediately. And then when we look at months of supply, that remains about 2 months, which keeps Apex in a seller's market. And if you go back and look at some of my past market updates, you're going to see that number has been hovering around 2 months in the last several market updates. So what this means for sellers in Apex is that it remains one of the strongest markets we have here in the Triangle. And then for buyers, most of the homes are still moving quickly in this price point, so preparation matters. And so the bottom line in Apex, it continues to favor the sellers, and buyers, you still have to move fairly quickly if there's a hot house on the market. Okay, let's head over to Cary. So if Apex is showing signs of growth, Cary is showing stability. And I've always said this, Cary is a very stable market. And so when we look at median home price in Cary, it stayed exactly what it was last year, $900,000 for the luxury segment. And days on market was also unchanged, sitting around 5 days on market. So that's remarkable consistency year over year for the month of May. Inventory actually declined slightly from 126 homes to 118. And then months of supply remained around 2 months. So what this tells me is that buyer demand in Cary still remains very healthy. In fact, the market isn't accelerating, but it's certainly not slowing down either. And when we look at the last several months, Cary has been a consistent performer. And so it always performs at high levels. In fact, I've actually talked to a lot of different agents and also my lender, and we're seeing a lot of multiple offers still in the luxury segment in the Cary market, with homes going over asking price and high due diligence amounts. So the bottom line, Cary still continues to favor the sellers, although maybe not as aggressively as Apex. And for buyers, don't mistake this stability as weakness, because as I mentioned just a minute ago, competition is still fierce on some properties here in Cary. So if you're considering a move to Raleigh, North Carolina, or any of the surrounding towns, and you're trying to figure out which community best fits your lifestyle, looking at commute times, looking at schools and a budget, well, that's exactly what we do. We help people every day move into the area. In fact, many of our clients start watching our videos, just like this one, months before they ever decide to make a move. So if you're planning on relocating, feel free to reach out. You can contact me via my website, Dare Realty Group. I'll leave the link right here. You can schedule a call, or if you would like, my number is right here as well. You can give me a call or send me a text message. We would love to help you create a game plan for your move. Okay, now let's talk about Holly Springs, because this market is telling a little bit of a different story, although Holly Springs always remains consistent as well. So Holly Springs is probably showing the biggest shift from where it was a year ago, although that shift is not very big. The median home price moved from $850,000 last year to just around $830,000 this year. So that's only about a 1.5% adjustment. So I wouldn't call it a major decline. In fact, homes are still selling very quickly here in the Holly Springs area. 6 days on the market compared to 7 days. But when we start to see inventory is also increasing a little bit from 50 to 59 homes. But let's think about that for a moment. 59 homes in the luxury segment, 750,000 and above in Holly Springs. So not a lot of houses on the market. And that's where I see a lot of these headlines showing percentages to create a buzz. And those percentages may sound high, but when you look at the actual numbers, they're still relatively low. The only metric that I'm looking at that really does stand out a little bit to me is months of supply. So Holly Springs in this market segment had about 2.3 months of supply. Today it's 3.5 months. So that is an increase, and that number is significant because it means more buyers have choices. And so as we increase months of supply, we're becoming more of a buyer's market. However, that is just for last month. And I can tell you from my personal experience, May was a little bit slower than April. And so what that increase in months of supply means for buyers, they do have more choices and they are becoming a little bit more selective. In fact, we're seeing that they are taking more time before making decisions. They're coming back for second showings. They're waiting days before they may put in an offer, even though they want to put in an offer. So the pace of the market is definitely slowed down from where we were maybe a year ago. And so now sellers really need to pay close attention to this, because now pricing and presentation even means more than it did just a few months ago. And then for buyers, there's just more opportunity for you right now. And you may have a little bit more negotiating power. And then for those sellers, the homes that stand out are the ones that are properly prepared and strategically priced, even maybe priced a little bit below what your market analysis is telling you. Those are the ones that are going to move a lot quicker in Holly Springs as we are approaching a balanced market, at least for the month of May. Now let's take a look at Raleigh. And at first glance, Raleigh appears relatively unchanged. In fact, the median home price in Raleigh was essentially flat year over year at just under 1.1 million. Homes are still selling very quickly in Raleigh. In fact, days on the market, it's going from 7 days to 8 days, so no big change there. But the interesting trend developing right here in Raleigh is that months of supply actually declined from 4.1 months to 3.4. And if you watch some of my past market updates, you'll see that that months of supply was starting to creep up even over the last couple of months. But at the same time, inventory actually decreased slightly from 451 homes to 442. So this tells us that demand continues to absorb any of the available inventory at a healthy pace. And so Raleigh, I would say, is the most balanced market of the 4 communities that I'm discussing today, but it's quietly becoming more favorable for sellers. And so what this means for sellers in the Raleigh market, in that luxury segment, that market conditions continue to be healthy. And then for buyers, opportunities do exist, but those desirable homes, just like we saw in Cary, Apex, and Holly Springs, are still attracting a lot of attention. So the bottom line, Raleigh remains a very balanced market with slight advantage to the seller. So let's go back and look at the question I asked in the beginning of the video. Is the Raleigh housing market starting to slow down? Well, as you can see, based on the numbers that I just provided, Not really. In fact, what we're seeing is a market that's becoming more localized. It's actually very hyper-local when we look across the towns of the Raleigh area. In fact, even within towns, certain communities and neighborhoods could even sell a lot faster. So you really have to be hyper-focused on what you're looking at if you are looking to buy or sell. Because we see that Apex is accelerating, Cary remains very stable, and Holly Springs is becoming more balanced. And then Raleigh continues to benefit from a steady demand and a tightening inventory. So I would say the biggest takeaway is that there isn't one market across the Raleigh area. All the towns are telling a little bit of a different story. And again, when you look at those towns, you really do need to look at the neighborhoods, at the subdivisions, because each one of those tells a different story too. And so that's why local market knowledge matters more than ever. The days of just putting a home on the market and expecting multiple offers, regardless of the condition, regardless of the location, may be behind us. But homes that are pricely correct, they're marketed effectively, and they're located in a desirable community, those are the ones that are still attracting serious buyers. So as we start to move into the summer market, I think the biggest opportunity for both buyers and sellers is understanding the local market and understanding the hyper-local market, meaning the neighborhoods within each town. Because what works in one area is not going to work in another. And what buyers can negotiate in one community may not be possible in another, especially when we're looking at some of those towns and some of those neighborhoods, like for instance, in Cary, some of those neighborhoods that are in West Cary that command a high premium. And that's why broad national headlines can sometimes be misleading. Real estate is local, and right now, Raleigh, North Carolina, and the surrounding towns continue to show growth and strength in the luxury market. And even if that strength is showing up differently depending on the community. So if you're thinking about buying or selling or relocating to Raleigh, North Carolina, or any of the surrounding towns and want to discuss your specific situation, Steve and I would love to help. Again, give us a call or a text. My number is right here, or go to our website, darerealitygroup.com, and schedule a call. And if you enjoy these monthly market updates, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because I break these down every month and I go over what's really happening in Raleigh, North Carolina, so you could stay ahead of all the trends. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.